So welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another battle replay, and this one is going to be another 1v1 actually, and this one, usually I try to post a video up every 2 days, but this one is just going to be sort of out on its own in the middle of two battles I usually post. This is basically just a bonus to what I would usually post, and that's mainly because this is a 1v1, and usually I like to put two 1v1s in the same battle, so it's around this, so I keep the length of my videos relatively even, usually around 1 hour. But in this case I didn't really have an appropriate battle to put this one with, so this will be a lot shorter than a video that I normally post, but it is also going to be like just a little bonus video anyway. So as I'm sure you can see, this one is going to be between Khan, played by DFDO, who sent me the replay, and across the way we can see Imladris, played by Drawn Subset. So without further ado, let's get into the army compositions. This is on the Frozen Lake bed as well, which is one of the more basic maps, I guess, in terms of a sort of a pitched battle. It's not quite as bland, I suppose you could say, as something like the Grassy Plain. It's much similar actually to the dry lake bed, only this one obviously is grass. It says it's the frozen lake bed, but I've only ever seen it actually used on the snowy weather settings like once or twice. Usually you'll see it like this, but there's a few terrain features that can be used, and indeed both sides have brought artillery, so that could end up being quite handy. So here at the front we can see the Variag bowmen, which do have a slight shield bonus, and in general Khan's skirmishers can actually on foot be fairly sturdy. The nomadic infantry and the Variag bowmen can both take a bit of a beating at range. Now obviously they aren't as skillful as the archers from Imladris, but they will make it a little bit more difficult for the elven archers to be as cost effective as maybe you would like. And obviously, as I'm sure you can see over here, we have the Black Powder Huacha, which based on its position, it might actually hit some of its own men in the back. It's so close to this archer line, which can be a little bit of a problem with a piece of artillery as wild as the Huacha. But Imladris are also relatively closely grouped together, so it could end up getting an awful lot of kills if the elven player is not willing to spread out quickly. As I'm sure you can see as well, the front line is going to be made up of a combination of Nurad halberds and Nurad footmen, which both of them are AP, so that will come in somewhat useful against Imladris, but for the most part the Khandish infantry, no matter what you bring really, other than the most elite Khandish foot soldiers, are going to be absolutely no match for Imladris. We've seen Imladris time and time again. They are a very popular faction for good reason, because they are very good, and obviously everyone likes the elves, so in terms of infantry, Khan are definitely going to be outgunned here. The one exception to that would be these guys you can see back here. The General's Bodyguard is going to be the Nurad War Chief's Retainers, which are, I believe, in 0.96, the only multiple HP halberdier in the game, ever since the Witch Realm Enslavers were changed to be a two-handed axe unit. And that does mean that they are very potent from the front. They're multiple HP, they do a lot of AP damage, and obviously their stats are befitting a General's Bodyguard unit, so they won't fall apart quite so quickly even if their phalanx is broken. But even so, this really is the one unit in the Khandish infantry corps that we can see that will be able to put up a decent fight. I mean, the Brotherhood of the Sword will as well, but they are not multiple HP. So against the better Imladris forces, even a unit as skillful as the Brotherhood of the Sword will struggle a little bit. Good to see some axe throwers. The nomadic marauders obviously will be able to do a decent amount of damage if they can close with the elves, but obviously the problem with that is if they come in range of the archers, they are very weak to arrow fire. And then of course it's natural to assume that Khan are going to bring a fairly hefty cav force against Imladris. It's one of the areas where they can really press home an advantage. The Variag Windriders are good melee cav. They are very damaging melee cav for the cost. The only problem is they are somewhat squishy to ranged fire. You know, you do need to sort of babysit them a little bit, but if you can get them into melee with other cav, they will punch above their weight in terms of their cost. And over here we have the ultimate glass cannons really in the Brotherhood of the Lance. They have the full charge bonus of 20, they are very quick, but they are somewhat more fragile than other cav units of this cost. Even most higher tier lancers are able to look after themselves in melee for at least a little while, and they're able to sort of mitigate range damage with good armour and shields. But that is not the case with the Brotherhood of the Lance. You know, particularly against arrow fire, they are very weak. But if you can get a nice charge off with them, then it's going to be very devastating indeed. And then moving over to this side, we do have some Nurad Retainers, which obviously very strong melee cav. The backbone really of most Khandish forces, purely because if you think of the mercenary cavalry as sort of like the baseline melee cav, the Nurad Retainers are just better versions of the Merc cavalry in every way basically, and it gives Khan really their solid centre. excuse me, we have some Variag horse archers back here, which again, horse archers are definitely an area in which they can just outnumber the Imladris cavalry. Like, the Imladris horse archers are good, as I've said before, but Khan have just got such a good variety of horse archers that it's too much for the High Elves to deal with, and that's 2 units of Variag horse archers there. So, fairly well balanced army actually from Dio. He hasn't sort of fully invested in his cav or his archers or his infantry. He's gone for a good balanced force between all of them, centred mainly around the Huacha, I'd have to say, because that is a very big part clearly of what he wants to do, sort of bombard the Elven position. Speaking of which, let's go and see what Drawn subset has brought. He has brought some Eldarenwe Haru Quinga for a start, which, as far as an individual arch unit goes, will be able to fairly easily defeat what Khand brought today, but again, Khand do have more numbers across the field. Eldar Quinga and Norito no Warriors are very similar in the kind of damage that they can put down at range, so that's basically 4 units of Imladris archers, which is not too surprising, I would suppose, because obviously foot archers are a very solid counter to horse archers, and obviously Khan can bring a lot of horse archers, so it's not too surprising to see Imladris bring so many archers in this capacity, but I would be slightly worried for them based on the fact that Khan do seem to be set up to try and absorb a lot of this arrow fire, give back some damage with their Variag Bowman, and obviously the Huacha is also a danger as well. Again, my cold still hasn't gone, so I can only apologise for me sounding gross, but we have some Imladris sentries. Once again, this is a unit which in very recent times we've seen be brutally effective against the right opponents, and Khand, I think, are the right opponents, because Khand have no pikes with which to answer them, and overall their defensive stats are not going to be able to keep them alive for too long. So the Imladris sentries, if it comes down to just a grind fest in melee, the Imladris sentries should be just fine, even against something like the Nurad War Chief retainers. Back here we have some Eldar Makar with the armour upgrades. Again, this is going to be a very fine choice against Khand indeed, because Khan's infantry, mainly stuff with the Nurad Footmen and the Nurad Halberds. AP is their friend, and the Eldar Makar are the one unit in the Imladris roster which aren't really that heavily armoured, very much focused around their skill, defensive skill. We also have a High Elven Catapult over here, which is going to have to try and snipe the Huacha, I think, because the Huacha early on could decide this battle one way or the other. If the Huacha manages to bombard this position, it's going to get pretty ugly for Drawn subset pretty quickly, I think. A couple of units of Imladris Guardians, one of which has got the armour upgrades, and one of which has not. Very, very powerful and potent line infantry, however, again, not something that Khan can really match on foot. A couple of units of Heru Hatal as well, which I can see why he brought so many spears, because obviously it is Khan, lots of cavalry potentially, and the Heru Hatal will be hoping to get in the way of stuff like the Brotherhood of the Lance and try and focus them down. But even in melee, the Heru Hatal shouldn't have too many problems against the Khandish forces that are arrayed against them. And out on this side we have some Imladris Sentinels and the Gwaithi Rockdoor, which, as far as a pairing goes, that's very strong and skillful spear cavalry combined with one of the most deadly units of knights in the game, so Khand are going to have to be very, very careful. Even with their melee cavalry, it's not really going to be enough to defeat this High Elven cavalry this time. And over on the other side, I believe we don't actually, so that is the entirety of the Imladris army. Small, as you would expect, but elite. Khand, meanwhile, going for a very balanced but quite a wide approach. We'll see how this goes though. Without further ado, let's begin. So it's going to come down to the Huacha here. We are going to have a look at the High Elven position, and we will see what the Huacha is able to pick. Obviously, in terms of archers, the elves have got a pretty substantial advantage, so if the Huacha doesn't manage to inflict too many casualties on Imladris, Khand will have little, well, they won't have many other options really other than to just sort of move forward and try and overwhelm the elves with sheer numbers. You can see here that the Heru Quing are taking a bit of a beating already, but none of them actually dying, and here comes the Huacha. And there you can see the catapult there. It's shots going long and the Huacha ripping into this area. The catapult did actually manage to get the first volley off there, so he could have killed off a couple of the Huachas here. But unfortunately now 2 of the catapults being destroyed by the rockets as they rip through the middle of the Imladris formation. And it's worth saying it looks a lot more devastating than it actually is, the Huacha, in many ways. You don't kill off huge quantities of a single unit, you do a little bit of damage to many, many units all at once. So you can see that the Norito no Warriors, Eldar Quinga and the Catapult were what took the main brunt of that damage there. The Huacha also doesn't have too much in the way of ammunition, but you can see here that the elves actually charging headlong into the Nurad retainers with their Imladris sentries, and now the Gwaithi Rockdoor are going to start going down the line of archers here, so they're going to get in there. Unfortunately for them, however, I don't think the Variag Bowmen are much of a threat at all. I don't really think that the High Elven Knights need to be committed to kill off the Variag Bowmen. He might be trying to sort of take away Khan's ability to skirmish entirely so that the elves can then use their own archers unopposed, but can see here that both units of Variag Horse Archers trying to poke down the Gwythi Rockdor, but unfortunately here you can see that the Imladris Sentinels charged right into the Nurad Retainers, and with all of the support nearby for the Nurad Retainers, they would win against the Imladris Sentinels one-on-one based on the support from the Horse Archers that they were being given from the outset. Obviously with the Gwythi Rockdor in here, that's a very different proposition now. The Nurad Retainers getting a full charge in the side, which is obviously going to be very, very deadly for them. They're going to have to retreat. So the High Elven Cavalry is open here, but they are low in numbers now. The Imladris Sentinels, just trying to sort of differentiate between the Retainers and the Sentinels. The Imladris Sentinels doing a, you know, they took a lot of casualties there, and you can see now that Dio is doing exactly the right thing. He's spreading his Horse Archers out, so if the High Elven Cavalry wants to go for the Horse Archers, they're going to have to go for one unit at a time. And even the Gwythi Rockdor, with how heavily armoured, you know, how good their shield value is, and also the fact that they have multiple HP, over time this will still kill them off, although those Nurad Retainers have been caught. The Elves are the one which are actually moving in here. Now, the Watcher, I think, has probably unsettled them a little bit, because I feel as though with all of those archers, Imladris could have actually afforded to sit back a little bit more and try and skirmish down Khan, because that is the real strength of this Imladris army, the fact that they have so many archers and they're of such higher quality than the Khandish ones. However, you can see that the entirety of the Khandish cavalry force has now come over here. The Brotherhood of the Lance and the Variag Windriders getting in here as well. They're going to overwhelm the Gwythi Rockdor through sheer numbers here, but this isn't really where the Brotherhood of the Lance want to be. As I said, glass cannons, definitely not going to be able to defeat the Gwythi Rockdor in sustained melee. You can see here that the Imladris really have no answer to the Khandish Horse Archers when they're in a vacuum like this. They really need to push up their own archers to actually support this cav force, which is why I think that the cavalry charge was a little bit doomed to fail from the start here, as Dio obviously knows what he's doing. The cavalry was entrapped, and now the Gwythi Rockdor still victory seems set, even with another unit of melee cav and with the Brotherhood of the Lance over here. But over time, the High Elven cav will be whittled down. So it is going to turn into a bit of an infantry scrap now. And you can see here that the Nurad Warchief Retainers are also coming across to help block the advance of the Eldarenwe Hero Batal. So you can see that I think maybe a bit of a push was organised here to try and push through the Halberds phalanx. But there's too many Nurad units here. So ultimately, while the Elves might make some progress, they're not going to be able to split right through the Khandish formations. That is going to be a bit of a shame for him. The Imladris Guardians are going to try and do the same thing here in the middle, but again, all of this Khandish infantry, all it is here to do is hold. You know, the Nurad Footmen and the Nurad Halberds are clearly no match in terms of quality for the Imladris infantry over here, but their job simply is to hold the front line and wait for Khan to do their damage elsewhere. You can see the Brotherhood of the Sword are actually going to try and run, I think, from the Imladris sentries. They certainly should try to, because they're going to stand no chance once those pikes are down. And over here, the Eldar Makar, they're actually going to try and wrap up the line, which is definitely the right thing to do. When you face a very thick phalanx like this, if you can possibly get around to the side or back of it, then you should definitely do so, because just trying to batter it down from the front is going to result in far more casualties for you. Nomadic Marauders are over here. You can see now the Brotherhood of the Lance are starting to come into the backfield over here, but so many of them died in the fight against the High Elven Cav that it was certainly not a fight that they would want to take from any length of time. You can see over here, though, that the Gwythi Rockdor actually able to sort of tank their way through all of this pressure that they've been receiving. You can see here that the Variag Windriders are about to be fully finished off, and if the Gwythi Rockdor are able to keep a decent number of their unit alive, they could start charging into the rear of all of these Nurad units, and then it could get pretty ugly for Khan, because in terms of pure skill, the Elves have got this on lockdown, and also they still have all those archers in the backfield, which when they're committed to melee, you know, they're pretty good in melee as well, especially the Heru Quinga. Khan do need to be careful here that they don't run out of their own resources too quickly, and Khan didn't commit as much resources to their cavalry as maybe they usually do, and that could end up biting them here, because a very small Imladris cavalry force here has been able to deal with what cav they have brought. Now the Nomadic Marauders are trying to throw their axes here into the back of the Imladris sentries, which is probably the best method by which Khan can actually deal with these guys, because in melee we've seen how strong the sentries can be in the past, and the Brotherhood of the Sword are trying to fight them head on, which is maybe not the best idea. The Imladris Catapult is also trying to go for the Horse Archers and very narrowly missing there. Meanwhile, the Gwythi Rockdor going for the Watcher. That's actually a little bit of a waste though, because you can see there that the axe thrower is immediately turning around and getting a lot of damage done on the Gwaithly Rock Door. Now, the reason why I say that's a bit of a waste is the Watcher at this point in the battle is completely useless. It's already had to be retreated off the front line. It doesn't have a good shot on anything. If it's shot now into the front line, it would kill more of its own men than elves. So the Watcher was really not a threat anymore. The real threat was the Nomadic Marauders, and the Gwaithly Rock Door took a full volley from that, and now the High Elven Knights are very depleted and not going to be too much of a problem heading into the late game of the battle. The Elven Archers, however, will be, and the Elven Archers are now starting to focus down the Nomadic Marauders. The problem, however, is the fact that the Elven Infantry is still hopelessly outnumbered here on the front line. And the Veriac Horse Archers, Horse Archers only have a charge bonus of 1, but with rear charges like this is still going to hurt Imladris pretty gravely. You can see now that the Veriac Horse Archers, I think, are going to try and finish off the Gwaithly Rock Door, kill off the High Elven General if they can help it. The Eldar Makar are winning over on this flank, but elsewhere there's just so many Khandish foot infantry, and over here you can see that where the Nurad Warchief retainers are, the line is held up very, very strongly, especially against spears, who aren't necessarily going to kill infantry as quickly as something like a heavy swordsman unit would if it was the Heru Makil. Things might be a little bit different. The Imladris Guardians here in the middle are being overwhelmed as well through sheer weight of numbers from all of these Nurad units. The Eldar Makar winning over here, a little bit more of a skeleton crew over here, as well as the Eldar Makar getting around to the flank and hitting the phalanx in the side. Bit of friendly fire there actually from the Imladris Catapult into its own Heru Quinga. But even though they don't have a very good charge bonus at this point, the Veriac Horse Archers might be the difference makers, because they're going to be able to charge into the rear of the Eldar Makar. They're going to be able to chase down the High Elven Archers, and if the elves are not able to use their archers to their fullest effect, because in terms of pure infantry, they are losing this fight just because Khan have got so many. They brought so many Nurad units, and the elves charged into the phalanx from the front in most places, and that was definitely not the most cost-effective thing to do. Meanwhile, the Nomadic Marauders being engaged in melee by what remains of the Imladris sentries. But the Imladris sentries at this point certainly are very depleted, and they aren't going to be able to prop up the Elven army all on their own. You can see here that the Heru Quinka are now in melee, trying to give some support to the Eldar Makar, but more Nurad footmen came over here to support this sort of flank for Khan. You can see here the Horse Archers still rear charging into this force of Imladris Guardians. That is going to be enough to finish them off. The Nurad units holding firm from the front. The Veriac Horse Archers are actually shaken, but I feel as though the Horse Archers have definitely been the MVPs for Khan in this situation. They were able to get a lot of damage done to the Imladris cavalry throughout the battle. Even if that wasn't necessarily a lot of kills, it was still a lot of damage. And now here that they're out of ammunition, they are being used as a makeshift shock cavalry regiment. They're going to be able to do a lot of damage, particularly to the Eldar Quinga. They need to cycle out of here and charge into this pocket over here, I think. Go after the squishiest units, deny Imladris as much of their numbers as they can. You can see now that the Nurad footmen are on the way over here. Going to go after the catapult as well, which the catapult could still be a factor in this battle. There's only one left online after being ravaged by the Watcher early on. You can see over here that the Elder Runway Haru Vital. The difference maker over here was definitely the Nurad Warchief retainers. Under normal circumstances, the Haru Vital would have done a little bit better against basic Nurad units, but with the Nurad Warchief retainers, they're very, very powerful, very, very skillful AP halberds. It was always going to be a lot trickier for the elves to break through over there. Here come more halberds as well, marching in formation. The AP not going to be particularly useful against some of these more basic Imladris units, but it's just more men that Imladris are having to try and cut their way through. And the Nurad's definitely doing their country proud. Another rear charge here from the Veriac Horse Archers. That is where the pikes are, however, so this could be the end for the Veriac Horse Archers if they're not careful. And again, I feel as though, even though Imladris made quite a few mistakes in this battle, that it's not hugely... I mean, they could still win this. I mean, I feel as though, just from a positional point of view, Imladris can't really win this anymore. They've lost the catapult, their units are all tied up and surrounded by the Nurads. But with how close it is in terms of the percentage of kills, it goes to show how good Imladris really are in a melee fight, because I feel as though the early Watcher pressure, the kamikaze charge of the cavalry and infantry early on from Imladris was not really what I would have done based on the army compositions and the position of Khan, and yet they've still managed to do okay for themselves. I still think that Linden are the easier Elven faction to play because of how versatile a lot of their units are, But I do still feel as though Imladris are an easy faction to play and get to grips with if you're newer at the game, because, you know, their units individually are so good. Whereas the Khandish infantry here, definitely lower in quality than the elves that are arrayed against them. And I think, I mean, those Nurad units over there, they're going to go after the High Elven Catapult, which actually is beating the Horse Archers in melee. But I feel as though the real difference makers once again are going to be the Nurad Warchief Retainers. Imladris really don't have anything at this point which can go toe-to-toe with them in melee. It's mainly skirmishers that are out of ammunition, and obviously that is not going to be sufficient to win this fight for them. Here come the Imladris sentries once again, but they're being clubbed in the back by the Nurad footmen. There's simply too many Nurads left alive. And there's still technically 4 of the Hwacha crew, but that might be enough to fire one of them, but again, like I said, if you fire the Hwacha at this point, it's going to kill more of your own men than it is the elves, and this is still fairly finely balanced. I mean, I would still back Khand all the way. And you can see they are now starting to pull ahead, because the elves can't move, they are wrapped up. The single strongest unit on the field now belongs to Khand as well. I feel as though, if anything, this is a display of how strong Imladris' units are, like I said. I mean, over here you can see the Variag Horse Archers pulling out their axes, the High Elven Catapult finally destroyed, and this is going to be the closing stages of this fight. But yeah, very well played to Dio. You know, he definitely had a very clear tactic of how to go about this. He had a very strong phalanx, which Imladris charged right on into, playing right into his hands. The Hwacha did enough damage early on to, I think, panic the elves. They charged forward rather unthinkingly. That was probably, I think, why Imladris moved forward so fast, was because the Hwacha was panicking them, particularly after losing 2 catapults. I feel as though if the elves had used their cavalry with a little bit more care, with a little bit more support from the elven foot archers, Imladris would have won this. Because if those elven foot archers were able to focus down the Variag Horse Archers, and then particularly the Imladris sentries wouldn't have taken quite so much damage. Not the sentries, sorry, the sentinels. The spear cavalry. But this is going to be the end, so obviously Imladris breaking off now, but within 10% in terms of kills. The amount of routing units will obviously change that a little bit, but still reasonably close throughout the battlefield. But I do feel as though there was always an air of inevitability about Khan's victory based on the Imladris tactics. So let's see what did the damage for Dio. I would say that Imladris might have more kills. Yes, indeed they do, because Khan's army was much, much larger, over 1,000 men larger. But let's see what did the damage for Dio. So you can see here the Nurad Warchief Retainers very comfortable in melee. The Nurad Footmen getting a decent amount of kills. I would assume that was in conjunction with the Retainers against the Heru Hatal, because the AP would have been useful there. And the Variag Horse Archers doing well across the course of the battle as well. And the Hwacha not getting too many kills, not as many as you would expect, but still. When the Hwacha fires at you, it can be quite a worrying experience, which is why I think Imladris made the mistake of charging his cavalry and infantry right into the front of the Khandish army. And they, you know, Imladris weren't a million miles away from winning this. Like I said, I think if they had split their 2 archer units, their foot archer units, out to both flanks, one supporting their cavalry, the other getting into a position where it could shoot right along the line of Nurad units, things could have been different. But as it was, a good match from Dio. Obviously this, like I said, is basically just a little bonus video which is going to come out, I think, on Tuesday. This is Sunday, the time of recording, so I think this one is going to come out on Tuesday, just sort of in between, sort of as apart from the regular schedule. So there's going to be a video on Monday, which would usually come out sort of a larger video. There's going to be a video on Wednesday, which again is going to be sort of larger, what I normally put out. This one's just going to be a little bonus one on Tuesday. I think that's the plan anyway. Of course, I could be talking nonsense. This could come out at some other point. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed this. Big thank you to Dio for sending this one in. I know he was eager for me to show this one, and I do like seeing Khand, because Khand are more versatile, I think, than people give them credit for. A bit like Rohan, people really only see the cavalry about them, but they do have more, which I feel as though Dio showcased pretty well here. Their phalanx was strong. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next. Again, I'm sort of still working my way through the videos, trying to get back into the groove of things a little bit. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this. I hope my cold is gone for next time as well, so I'm not coughing. And yeah, I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.